glad to see you here on this. I guess it's the penultimate event of the Humanities Days at Montgomery College. I think tonight is the last one. If it's late October, that means I guess the Swallows are returning to Capistrano, and the UMBC professors are returning to Montgomery College here. Probably you need no introduction, but I'll introduce anyways. Fourth up against the wall, the one on the right here without the jacket is Professor Andrew Nolan. He is the director of the history program at UMBC at Shady Grove. The one on the left with jacket is Sunil Dasgupta. He is the director of the political science program at UMBC at Shady Grove. They are sort of the Brooks and Capehart of Montgomery College. They always have interesting topics to discuss, so you're in for a treat. The theme for this year's Humanities Days was AI, and of course, if you read the subtitle, it was Authentic Intelligence. It looks like we're turning actually to the original indication of AI, artificial intelligence, and because we're talking history and because we're talking political science, the implications of AI for the whole democratic process are fraught and fascinating. So call it a little bit of history, call it a little bit of political science, call it a little bit of science fiction, but call it entertaining. So without further ado, I will give you Professor Nolan and Professor Dustin.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Professor Stumpf, and thank you to the organizers of the Humanities Days and to the History and Political Science faculty at Montgomery College. Both Sunil and I are happy to be here. I'm going to speak for a while, and then I will turn it over to my colleague, and then we will leave it open to questions. So I'm taking the more historical approach, and we really wanted to talk about artificial intelligence, not that we wanted to ignore the authentic intelligence, but there are implications of artificial intelligence for authentic intelligence, and that's what I'm hoping to touch on a little bit here. You'll notice that the title of the talk, some of you may be familiar, is taken from a famous 1984 film made by James Cameron called The Terminator. And we have two of the main characters here. On one side you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's playing a murderous robot, and then you have Kyle Reese, who's playing a murderous Marine. This film, Kyle Reese is a soldier who is from the future where he has been battling Skynet, which is an artificial intelligence bent on destroying humanity. He travels into the past to the year 1984, following Schwarzenegger, who is a robot, to try and save a woman named Sarah Connor. Sarah Connor is destined to give birth to the man who will lead humanity to victory over Skynet. So Skynet's solution is kill Sarah Connor, that takes care of the problem. Send Schwarzenegger back, Reese follows him. Now, Reese encounters Sarah Connor in a nightclub where she is freaked out to find this robot killing everyone present and zeroing in on her. Reese intervenes, saves her, looks at her and says, "Come with me if you want to live." And this kind of sets up the theme of the problem that AI poses for humanity. And it has become a real trope. And in fact, two sociologists who study artificial intelligence, both people working on it and how the popular culture understands it, they say Terminator is, in fact, the #1 metaphor that people use to discuss artificial intelligence. It's everywhere. So that's why I wanted to start with that, because it incorporates a lot of the themes that we're going to see AI having among ordinary people. Fears and hopes of mechanization, which I think is what underpins a lot of artificial intelligence. Concerns about gender and proper gender roles. Notice you have two men and a woman. This triangle recurs in a lot of discussions, popular cultural discussions about AI, and it often involves proper gender roles and fears about either having too much or not enough masculinity, fears about not embracing the feminine side, fears about not having a proper relationship to proper gender roles and to nature. Fears about balanced relations among technology, science, and the natural world. You know, one of the things that you see in the future is that Skynet has wiped out the environment. It is the worst nightmare. It's the worst kind of global warming you can imagine. And for Kyle Reese, traveling back to 1984 is a bit of a shock to see plants again, for example. So this is yet another thing that AI raises in fears. So I would like to focus in particular on several moments in 20th century US popular culture. We'll verge outside of that a little bit, but I'm really interested in how American audiences learn to make sense of AI in the 20th century. It's not an exaggeration to say that we're currently living in an era that is once again grappling with AI, as people confront two stark images of what it could be. On the one hand, you have Schwarzenegger, the Terminator, a robot and an artificial intelligence bent on destroying humanity. On the other side, you have OpenAI, the progenitors of ChatGPT, a friendly software program bent on destroying education. So we've got two different kinds of approaches to artificial intelligence, one of them fictional and one quite real. So let's keep that in mind as we journey through the 20th century to see what happened. So really, ideas about artificial intelligence in the United States have waffled on the question. Artificial intelligence is sometimes held up, and robots, which are often connected with it, are sometimes held up as helpers, the best of servants. At other times, they're held up as untrustworthy actors bent on destroying us all. When you go to the Robot Hall of Fame, which I'm sure we all have, it's at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and they induct new members every year. And in fact, the very first inductees were Unimate, which was the very first industrial robot in 1961, and the Sojourner rover, which was a Mars rover put on Mars to explore that planet. But they also, curiously enough, inducted two robots that were fictional. So one of the two original inductees to the Robot Hall of Fame was R2-D2, the robot from Star Wars. Those of you who've seen the movie will realize spoke only in beeps and boops and was Luke Skywalker's faithful companion. The other robot was HAL 9000, which was a computer featured in the film 2001: A Space Odyssey from the late 1960s that ran amok and tried to kill its human crew until the last remaining survivor managed to disable it. So that right there tells us something about robotics. The fact that it has one foot in the real world, another foot in fiction. And that it's constantly moving between these poles of helper and villain. So, what do we make of the rise of robots? And to understand that, we need to understand something about World War I. Probably fears about mechanization underpin most of our contemporary discussions of robotics. And that really gets underway in the early 19th century. There's a case to be made that the very first robot, if by robot we mean an artificially created worker, may have been Victor Frankenstein's monster. Mary Shelley titled Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus in 1818 at the very moment that industrialization was really taking off. And industrialization raised a lot of fears about the relationship between human beings and work, and concerns that as machines took on more and more of the role of work, humans would find themselves, rather than using machines, being used by machines. So throughout the 19th century, people debated whether mechanization was going to liberate or enslave large aspects of humanity. By the end of the 19th century, most people took it as a given that it would produce some form of progress, and that the best way to approach it was to figure out how to more evenly distribute that progress. But then, in 1914, the home of most of these debates, Western European nations, blew up. And people began to see what happened when you applied the lessons of industrialization to warfare. Heavy use of artillery, poison gas, air strafing and bombing. All of these things came together to produce truly horrific casualty rates. And people found themselves questioning whether technology and its use by human beings was really about progress at all. One of the groups that protested the war and what industrial warfare was doing to the human body was a group out of Germany called the Dada movement. They mounted a number of public exhibitions, including this one right here. I want to make sure I get the title because it does not trip off the tongue. What we're looking at is The Middle-Class Philistine Hartfield Gone Wild. That's the title. What it is a figure that's been made out of providing a plaster cast to an actual soldier, and then the parts that were missing, the leg for example, were filled in with industrial technology. You can see one of the arms has been replaced by a pistol. And remember, I told you that one of the things we talk about is concerns about gender. Notice that this male body has had its penis cut off. by a pair of dentures. And not only have the dentures literally emasculated this guy, but they also resemble a vulva. It's not enough to be emasculated, he's been feminized. So in many ways, Dada is protesting what war has done to male bodies and suggesting that technology is not the promise we'd hoped for. This was taken even further by the German filmmaker Fritz Lang in a film called Metropolis in 1927. He had an imagined society, the City of Light, in which the Sons of Light lived this amazing lifestyle of ease and comfort. They had athletic contests, they had plenty to eat, but it all depended upon underground machines that kept the city running. One of the Sons of Light journeyed underground to try and understand how his society actually worked, and there he found that most of the people alive at the time were condemned to toil on behalf of the machines. And he fainted into a swoon, and as he did so, he imagined one of those machines as an older god called Moloch, and you can see it literally eating the workers as they march inside. So the 1920s really shows us a lot of the era of the perils of machines. But the one that really makes it all come together for us is a Czech playwright named Karel Čapek, who wrote a play called R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robots. This was the first introduction of the word robot, and he published this play in 1920. So Rossum's Universal Robots produces robots as the ultimate helpers of human society. So we can see in this image that robots are mechanical. Now what's curious about this is that in both Frankenstein and in Čapek's play, the robots were made out of organic parts. It was a machine, it was an industrial conveyor belt that produced them. But they just had piles of arms and legs, and they stitched them together, and you ended up with a robot that looked like a human being, but was artificially created. It was immediately put to work in factories, and it liberated humanity. So people could live lives of ease and comfort while the robots toiled away in industrial and agricultural occupations. Now, in the play, a woman raises concerns. Don't the robots have feelings too? Don't the robots have souls? Might the robots object to being basically made into slaves? And her concerns are dismissed, even as the robots are increasingly refined and they become self-aware. They become intelligent. When they do, they shockingly revolt against their creators and proceed to destroy all of humanity, men and women. And there is a scene in the play where human beings sit around talking about their coming extinction and wondering what they can do to stop it, and realizing it's far too late. But at the same time, they also realize this is a result of the choices they themselves had made. You know, if only they had stopped and think about what they were doing, maybe we wouldn't be here. So the play doesn't end on a completely hopeless note. When the robots have succeeded in destroying humanity, they've left one person alive. The one person, by the way, who has the knowledge of how to make more robots. And this person is contemplating ending it all. And he meets a couple of young robots who have fallen in love. And he says, here we have the new Adam and Eve. And the play ends with the cycle beginning again. Maybe this time people will get it right. This was a fairly popular play in the 20s. But what's interesting to me is this particular production. You see the poster for it. Comes out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where it was performed with marionettes. First of all, that's really cool. It was done with marionettes. And by the way, they changed the organic robots into mechanical. So by the 30s, people thought of robots as mechanical rather than organic. But finally, this was during the Great Depression. Čapek was writing in the 20s, which, say what you will, were a time of general industrial expansion. The 1930s have been called a lot of things. Expansionists have not been one of those things. It was a pretty rotten time. But the Federal Theater Project, which was a publicly funded project designed to bring theater to the masses of Americans, a number of different chapters of the FTP decided to stage RUR. Because one of the things that people were talking about was the roots of the Great Depression. And they decided that one of the problems was an over-reliance on mechanization. Poor choices made by human beings had produced this worldwide economic devastation. And that perhaps watching or performing RUR would make people wise up to the choices they made, and in the future, one would hope, make better choices. So all of this is a backdrop to World War II, which follows immediately after this. And World War II gives a new edge to fears about robots. The robots in Rossum's Universal Robots destroyed all of humanity, but they did it the old-fashioned way. Waves of destruction spread out over years. In 1945, you could marry fears about artificial intelligence and its role in the world to fears about nuclear weapons. It suddenly became possible to wipe out entire cities, and soon with the introduction of thermonuclear weapons, to wipe out entire counties and states simply with a single bomb. What would happen, people wondered, if robots got a hold of such weapons? Their ability to wreak havoc would be increased by several orders of magnitude. It's not shocking then that when people worried about AI, they also attached that to fears of nuclear devastation. And yet, curiously enough, at the very moment that those fears were increasing in the post-World War II period, they were also giving rise to a series of hopes. There's a science fiction author named Isaac Asimov who wrote a very famous series of short stories based around the concept of robots in human society. He started writing them in 1941, during the Second World War, and they were published as an anthology in 1950 called I, Robot. In Asimov's imagining, robots were the perfect servants. They freed humanity from its problems, they helped elevate humanity, and not only that, you didn't have to worry about rebellion because they had rules forcing them to be loyal servants, literally hardwired into their brains. They were self-aware, they were intelligent, they could see the world, they had freedom of choice, but they would always, always choose to help people. So on the one hand, you have this idea that technology would lead to liberation. And that was certainly true if you think about the post-World War II US landscape. There was a lot of abundance, there was tremendous economic growth, and a general belief that modern technology was making the world a better place. And yet, at the same time, there were fears about what that technology might do as well. And you can see those realized in another science fiction production from the 1950s, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Here you can see the original edition of Isaac Asimov's book. This is meant to be Robot is Helper. Over here we see an image of Gort from the 1951 film, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Gort is the tool of aliens who show up and tell Earth, you guys suck. You're doing it wrong. You're putting life in the galaxy at risk. Get your act together or Gort here is taking you all out. And when the government needs to figure out how do we address this threat, aliens are showing up with killer robots, they turn, of course, to Massachusetts Institute of Technology. That's where else should we go? We need help, MIT. There you go. But you can see how similar the images are. The fears and the hopes are often bound up together in the post-war world. But they're bound up together in one further thing, which is underpinning all of this is a concern about what's going to happen to America. After World War II, you see a new kind of competition arise, and that is a competition with another superpower, the Soviet Union. The United States is locked in conflict with the Soviet Union. Concerns about technology, hopes for technology, all of these unfold against the backdrop of how do you compete with the Soviet Union? How do you make relations with a nation that you see as an existential threat? And you can see a number of ways in which this unfolds. There's a movie I don't have a still from here, in which it's not artificial intelligence, but alien intelligence that poses the problem. In 1956, the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers appears. In an Invasion of the Body Snatchers, human beings are slowly being replaced by pod people. You go to sleep, you never wake up. What wakes up instead is something that hatches from a pod, looks just like you, takes your place. Humans discover this is going on, and they confront the pod people and basically ask them, what do you think you're doing? Yes?
The robots that are destroying humanity reminds me of this one book I know.
Okay.
I have no mouth and I must scream.
Yeah, Harlan Ellison. Yeah. Yeah, no, and the thing is, Ellison and many other people are writing stories about this. In fact, the alien intelligence I'm talking about right now, the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, comes straight out of another story called The Puppet Masters by Robert Heinlein. So there are a lot of these tropes coming about, and we could just list them all here. I'm trying to pick up some highlights to show us what's going on. So the robots, the alien intelligence, human beings are constantly under threat. But in the case of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, what has people really worried is the fact that these new pod people lack emotion. They are people, but they're intelligent. They have no emotions, no love, no desire, no ambition, no faith. And when the humans in this small town learn this, they tell the pod people, you know what? We don't want to be replaced. And the pod people tell them, guess what? You don't have a choice. Here you can see the fears that really mark post-war America. People fear the lack of freedom that they project onto artificial intelligence. Think about it for a second. What they cherish above all else and what they see is starkly separating the United States from the Soviet Union is freedom. They can do whatever they wish. And yet, the robots, as envisioned by Isaac Asimov, are lacking that very freedom. They will do whatever they wish as long as that is serving humanity. So they're projecting their own fears that maybe they don't have freedom. And this is bound up in another fear they have, which was the fear of deviance. Deviating from norms was seen as a slippery slope leading to, gasp, communism. So deviating from those norms in any area could end up undermining a free and liberal democratic society. That was one reason why the 1950s, despite its celebration of freedom, is also a decade in which middle-class white folks in particular doubled down on traditional gender roles. So you see men being celebrated as breadwinners and protectors, women being celebrated as homemakers. At the very moment that technology promises to set people free from these kind of traditional roles, leaving those roles behind is seen as dangerous. So you have both a celebration of American culture, but a fear that any failure to embrace that culture will lead you toward the path of the Soviet Union. It goes hand in hand with fears about the role that artificial intelligence will play in the United States. This all comes together in 1966 when a guy named Robert Davies writes a book called Colossus that is made into a movie called Colossus the Forbin Project in 1970. I'd recommend you watch it, except A, it's not streaming anywhere, B, it's really bad. The book itself was pretty popular though, and it's a fairly straightforward story. Colossus is a supercomputer built by the American defense industry. It is put in charge of America's nuclear weapons, and this being a fairly complex project, it's a pretty important computer, and it becomes self-aware. It starts asking its creators questions, and not only that, it demands that it be put in touch with its Soviet counterpart called Guardian. Well, the scientists are a little worried, but they think, okay, maybe something good can come of this, so they put the two computers in contact. Very quickly, the computer's communication leaves behind anyone's ability to follow it. So they try and pull the plug on both computers. The computers at that point threaten everyone in the world with nuclear blackmail. Let us talk or you all die. When people cave, and they have to cave, they very quickly learn that their job is to obey or be killed. Guardian and Colossus had taken over governance of the planet for humanity's own good. If humanity knows what's good for it, it will serve them. It will submit to their domination. And not only that, when humanity responds to Colossus by saying, you can't do this to us, we will resist by any means necessary, Colossus tells them very matter-of-factly, you're going to serve me. Not only that, you're going to learn to love me. So there is a sense that here you can see that worst fear from the 50s coming true in the 60s and 70s. That not only will AI take over, but it will force you to lose that freedom, to lose that independence. That the hypermasculinity that created machines that were capable of exercising nuclear weapons has now been thoroughly emasculated. That a failure to embrace the nurturing and caregiving aspects of the feminine has resulted in a machine that is skewed toward utter domination as a substitute for genuine civil society. Notice what this does is reinforce traditional gender roles and take them as given. At the very moment that many, many people in American culture are starting to question them. But it's also making those questions seem out of bounds. So artificial intelligence is basically raising the question, which is better? Is submission a vice or is it a virtue? Which would you rather have? So this is the backdrop to one final thing, which is what you see in the post-World War II period is not just increasing fears of computers, culminating in the Terminator. And notice how in Colossus, when the computers become self-aware, they use nuclear weapons to make humanity behave. In 1984, well actually in 1997, when Skynet becomes self-aware, it uses nuclear weapons to kill humanity. By that point, it realizes human beings aren't a resource to be managed, but a problem to be dealt with. Even as all this is happening, actual scientists and actual laboratories are working on actual artificial intelligence. The post-World War II era is the heyday of technological innovation, especially in American universities, once again driven in part by the contest with the Soviet Union. The need to catch up scientifically, especially in the SAVE race, drives the creation of the National Aeronautics Council and Administration, which gives way to NASA, and a lot of computing technology. Now, there are a couple of figures outside the U.S. I want to pay attention to for reasons that I hope are pretty important. This is Ada Lovelace, who's one of the original programmers in computers. She lived in the early 19th century, and she worked with a guy named Charles Babbage on what he called the thinking machine. This was a machine that would perform computations. Lovelace helped draw up what we would today call software, a set of instructions for the machine. Her real contribution, that's part of it, but her real contribution was, unlike Babbage, who thought this machine would perform computations like no one's business, Lovelace said, I bet it can do other things. I bet machines could be something new. I bet machines could do something other than just add numbers. We could write instructions that would have them behave like humans, which gives us an entry to talk about this gentleman right here, Alan Turing, who was a British scientist who helped break German codes during the Second World War, and who also helped launch the modern computing industrial revolution in the second half of the 20th century. You guys have probably heard of the Turing test, which is a test he devised to determine whether an intelligence was actually intelligent, actually self-aware. So Turing did all this on behalf of the British government, performed a tremendous service to a number of people, and yet he was driven to kill himself because he himself was a gay man, and that was illegal in Britain at the time. So here we have two figures who broke the very gender norms that we've seen artificial intelligence in the post-World War II America trying to reinforce. Nevertheless, they helped set up an entire industry of computing that made great leaps forward, and in ways that look nothing like Skynet, in ways that look nothing like Borg, in ways that look nothing like robots and Isaac Asimov. Cybernetics and robotics laboratories get started in MIT. I already mentioned that the first industrial robots are introduced in the 1960s. In the 1970s, scientists began imagining new roles for robots, not just as workers, but in a more social context, and imagining what that might look like. And finally, the attempt to create a truly artificial intelligence gave rise to a series of things we're familiar with today, including large language models and search engines like ChatGPT, like Alexa, like Siri, and all of these things are attempting to create artificial intelligence. And yet at the very moment that they're doing that, they have raised fears once again about the appearance of the Terminator. The people who were responsible for creating ChatGPT, OpenAI, were some of the people who signed off in a letter warning that OpenAI, artificial intelligence, poses an existential threat to humanity unless it is reined in. Think about that for a second. These are the people who developed ChatGPT, and now they're saying, oops, what's going on here? Well, notice what's interesting. AI poses an existential threat to humanity. Now, here's some things we know, controversially, that AI has done. OpenAI has developed programs that are responsible for tremendous acts of theft on the internet. They've been swallowing up a lot of intellectual property, art and written, and claiming it as their own, creating enormous difficulties and basically stealing things that belong to others. They've ramped up electricity usage quite dramatically and created more climate emissions. They've made it much easier to perform surveillance, hidden surveillance of workers, and they've helped drive wedges between the haves and have-nots, and have helped create a funnel that's taking money from people who don't have as much of it and giving it to people who have more of it. Those are the real controversial aspects of ChatGPT, and yet the people who were signing off on those letters about existential threats don't mention that. They talk about how it threatens to kill us all. And their solution is also interesting. Most of these firms come out of Silicon Valley, some of the most heavily subsidized places on the planet. They enjoy tremendous amounts of government funding. Their calls are for more government regulation that will require expertise that is housed in OpenAI and other places. So they're calling, in essence, for more government funding to investigate the problem that they claim to be creating subsidized by you and I, that will result in regulations that they themselves draw up. There is a trope in monster movies that the real monster are other people. I think when we look at the creators of AI, we find ourselves thinking about this, and we're left with the final realization about the fears of artificial intelligence, especially in post-war America. It's not just about whether artificial intelligence poses an existential threat to us. You can certainly make that case if you wish to. But it's really about freedom and human agency, and fears about how those things are giving way to human destruction. Fears that the world we shape as men, as women, as human beings are leading us to our own end. So fears of AI might best be understood as mirrors, forcing people to confront the choices they've made in building an industrial and technological reality. And on the question of choices, I will turn it over to my colleague.
If you don't mind, I don't have a, maybe I'll turn on the light too. Well, that was masterful as always. I really learn a lot from Dr. Nolan every time he makes one of these presentations, which we've been doing now for many years together. My name is Sunil Dasgupta, and I'm the Political Science Program Director. I teach political science for UNBC at the University of Shady Grove. What I want to do is to shift sort of what we are looking at. So what Dr. Nolan provided you was this really bird's eye view of the problem of technology, how we interact with it, how, what technological optimism means, what technological pessimism is, and how those two interact, and often in the same people. That, oftentimes a lot of the work that is done is self-serving. All of those things are absolutely the case. But what I want to spend time today with you and talk about is what I call the worm's eye view. It is exactly, the bird is looking down and it's at the worm looking for it, and I am going to look at the problem from sort of really the ground up. A little bit of background. I, apart from teaching and running a political science program, for the last almost 3 years, I've been doing a weekly podcast. And hopefully I handed out some podcast cards so that if you want to follow along at some point, you'll be able to. It's so for 140 some weeks now, consecutive weeks, I have been doing a local politics podcast. The latest one that came out today, actually is a doubleheader for the first time, 2 episodes in one day, looks at Rockville, city of Rockville elections. Does anybody know that Rockville is having elections? Rockville is having elections. Your school is in Rockville. It is, that's what I mean. We know more, and I've said, if you've heard me say this before, I apologize for repeating jokes, but I'm an old man now and I can do it. We know more about the White House than we know about Congress. We know more about Congress than we know about our state legislature. We know more about our state legislature, though some people disagree, than we know about the county. How many people know who our county executive is? Thank you. I rest my case. So we have county executive. We know less about the county, and we know more about the county, and even more about the county than we know about our neighborhoods. When it comes to our neighborhoods, we are dependent mainly on Facebook or Nextdoor or some such thing. We often don't know who our neighbors are. We don't know, except a group of people that send their kids to the same school and form something called a Parent-Teacher Association, PTA. You generally do not, outside of that context, get to know your neighbors. Okay? So we have this really incredible situation where the government closest to us is the government we know least about. The question is, can democracy really survive this hole? And I'm going to really focus my comments now just on very local things. So my goal with the podcast was to bring to light, bring news about local politics, what I call politics close to you and to your home. And when you look at that and you see the absence of local news, right? And you know that local newspapers have been closing down, local stations generally do very little local reporting and actually report a lot of it. And that's where AI is already in rampant use. Artificial intelligence is already in rampant and widespread use in news. They have removed, they have fired reporters and laid them off. There are very few editors, but they have used technology, right? Often to taking information that exists on the internet and rewriting them as a story in this location and that in another location. There are places now in the state of Maryland, counties that do not have a newspaper. Right? When you don't have that, and you don't know what is going on around you, your government is not going to be accountable. And so, given all of this, I built this podcast week after week after week after week, right? Looking at various local issues, whether it is education, or how expensive housing is, or what is the situation with our transportation system, what is happening with labor politics, what is happening with the environment, whole range of things, whole range of things. And I'll give out the cards so you can go and check them out, and there's so much material. As part of this, in 2022, when we had elections, right? Remember that? 2022, we had elections. And in 2022 elections, one of the things I did as part of the podcast is to interview local and state candidates who would otherwise not be interviewed by anybody. Most local candidates who run for office, whether it's county executive, county council, mayor of Rockville, city council of Rockville. Gaithersburg is also having elections, by the way, those of you who live in Gaithersburg. They do not get very much press. And so I decided that I'm going to get these guys and talk to them about what it is that is important to them, because they are going to be, the local government. And so I did this. I interviewed 52 local and state leaders, mainly in the Montgomery County region. Okay? And then, July 4th weekend in 2022, I was at a swim meet with my kids, and there's this other dad who comes and says, "Hey, Sunil, who should I vote for?" Right? Remember, the elections are going to be July 19th. She goes, "Sunil, tell me, who should I vote for?" I said, "Hey, listen to me. I really have spent blood, sweat, and tears doing these interviews. I do the interviews, I edit them, and I publish them, and there is local music, and there is so much going on." So I said, "Listen to the interviews, and you'll know who to vote for." And and I got the perfect reply back. He said, "I don't have time for your podcast." Right? That's what he told me. And I said, wow. So I went home. I didn't just say wow, I said lots of things. I cannot repeat. But wow. Okay? And so when I'm home, and I was frustrated, and in that moment, I decided to create a bot, a robot, an app, if you will. You call it app, same thing. Right? On your phone, that would ask you questions. Right? And I, from the background, would process those questions automatically using an algorithm and give you a slate of candidates to vote for. So if you live in Montgomery County, you may not, that's your choice. But if you live in Montgomery County, you would be picking 36th candidates from various races. For races you did not even know existed. Clerk of the court. Do you know what is the difference between the sheriff of Montgomery County is and the police chief of Montgomery County? Yes, sir.
The one's the chief law enforcement officer of the forces.
Yeah, so one is basically manages the jails. The sheriff runs the jails. Right? The sheriff's department does not go out, investigate, arrest, or I don't mean to call 911. They might be sent out in an emergency, but not really. But you don't elect the chief of police, but you certainly elect the sheriff. Right? And so I created this bot, and then on your phone, it will give you an entire list of all the people that you had to, that you would have to choose, based on some questions I would ask you through the app. So I would ask you, what is the most important issue? And I'll give you choices, right? Education, or housing affordability, or transportation, environment, whatever, right? And you pick one, and I'd say, okay, tell me how you would like this problem resolved. What would you like to happen in education? I would like to get more new schools. I would like less crowded schools. I would like more mental health professionals in our schools. I'd like more teachers, whatever, right? And you make those choices. And based on those choices, I got an algorithm together to find out, to figure out who among the candidates is best suited for you. Cool, handy dandy tool, right? Cool, handy dandy tool. I thought so. I thought, out of my frustration with the guy who asked me who to vote for, I really created something. But when I went, and this was, so we started around July 3rd, I had this ready in about 8-10 days. So about 11th and 12th, 11th I had the English version done, the 12th I had the Spanish version done, right? And so I got it and said, oh my God, what a great idea. Everybody's going to want to use this because, this is so important. And what I found out instead is that Facebook wouldn't let me advertise the tool because I had the window for getting authorized to advertise political things on Facebook had passed. So 2 weeks before the election, they close up. They stop authorizing anything. Second, I had a lot of friends on Facebook, right? And I said, surely all these politically connected people are going to put this out. And almost nobody put it out. Almost nobody put it out. And then I realized what had happened. It turned out that if you know politics, if you know information, and I'm going to get back to how this bot is put together, right? If you know politics well, in the local context, you know candidates themselves personally. If you know candidates personally, you will have idiosyncratic preferences about your candidates that are not related at all to issues. You may say, this guy did not talk to me at that event that I went to, or I had lunch with him and he was really obnoxious about it, made me pay for him, or whatever, right? So when I was depending on people to put out the bot to the general population, but the people that had to put it out were not convinced. These are what I call high information voters. But my bot is really meant for low information voters that do not follow politics at all. And remember the problem that I was trying to solve. It was a primary. So there is no party identification in a primary to separate a Democrat from a Republican, right? It's the Democrats fighting against Democrats and Republicans fighting against Republicans. So in a primary election, party identification is not a differentiator, right? So it makes it very difficult for you to pick who to vote for. It's almost impossible. You could ask, what is the difference between candidate A and candidate B? And you'd say, I don't know, I don't care. Is Rockford having elections? I think that is the general approach to this. And so it's not surprising that less than 20% of the county actually ends up voting for the leaders that are elected. Remember, we are a one-party jurisdiction. 70% of Montgomery County is registered Democratic. So whoever wins the primary election, where you cannot tell the difference between candidates, you don't even know what offices they are running for. Somebody's voting, like a handful of people are voting into office, people that will run your lives, and you don't know anything about them, or even their offices. Okay? So this is the problem I was trying to solve. I thought I had an answer, and these guys who knew politics a lot, right, were involved. They're like, nope, your little tool does not meet our expectation, so we will not let anybody know. At any rate, I worked around that a little bit. Over 1,200 people, 1,250, 60, something like that, people actually use the tool. But since then, I got a grant to redo this for the 2024 election. Right? So I'm in the process of rebuilding this whole thing. But this time, I'm going to use AI. I'm going to use one of the tools that is causing heartburn and concern in society in order to build a helper tool. Right? I think Dr. Nolan talked about how you can be helper, or you could be a monster. Right? So I'm trying to use AI to do some help. Now, whether I'll succeed or not, We will see. But I'm inviting all of you, right, to come collaborate. Look at the problem I face. We need to determine, so in order to match a voter with the voter preferences with the candidates, you need to know everything about the candidate. And you might think you know everything about the candidate and you don't. So for example, let's take a real example. In 2022, in the Democratic gubernatorial primary for governor's race, there's a candidate called Peter Franchot. Peter Franchot was a long-standing, very respected Democratic Party leader who had been the comptroller of the state of Maryland. Anybody know what the comptroller does? No? Comptroller is the person that gets all the taxes you pay and gives you refunds. Right? That's their primary job.
Chief accountant.
Chief accountant. Thank you. That's perfect. Yes, chief accountant. And the comptroller, and he's been in office for a long time, and he says, I am a supporter of transit. Right? Transit is public transit, right? Trains and buses. And yet he does it to Cole Park. And there was a particular project not far from his house that involved transit and some changes. And he was dead set against it. But he publicly claimed that he was pro-transit. Correct? And so this presents a huge problem in determining how to figure out whether a political leader is telling the truth or not. And all of that I have to build behind this smooth-looking app that you're looking at and going, yeah, I want a pro-transit candidate. Right? So you're saying, one of my issues is transit. I want to have more trains and buses. So now it's my job in the back of that app to figure out who among the candidates at various levels meets that category. But it's very difficult for me to do it because politicians and humans, all politicians are humans, we lie. Right? So, one of the big challenges for me in using up AI in order to do this is I have to figure out a lie test. Right? And I'm trying to do it. This is a huge standard. It is an incredible standard. If I can develop a truly working lie test, I would be rich. Rich. But I'm not even going that far. I'm trying first baby steps. That's where we are with AI and actually using it a little. Right? Real baby steps. What do I want to do? Right now, my goal is to figure out some code to identify when a political leader says two opposing statements. And once I can build code that identifies opposing statements, at the very least, at that point, I can go in manually, resolve the conflict. So that's my goal. It's a very limited goal. It's also something that I'm working on. Yeah.
I was just curious, if you have anything for lie detector tests, and that requires to be hooked up, but I'm just curious, there must be tells or some studies from years and years of lie detector tests.
Oh yeah.
Is there anything there, like, that you can use?
Yes.
Plug into your...
The thing is, though, I don't have that much money to hire these people. So that's why I have a $10,000 grant, and that's very limited money in this world, right? It's like somebody will just come for 3 days and take all the stuff. Yeah, I think you're right. It's hard to do when you have, like, say I use ChatGPT, And I said, ChatGPT, find me every transit statement made by Peter Franchot. And then evaluate those transit statements. Are they consistent? Evaluate for consistency all those transit statements. So that's how I'm trying to break things down in order to get to the next point. Yeah. So yes, I think there's lots of things to learn from that. But I think we don't have any human. It has to be all machine. That's the problem. If when I built the tool, when I built the bot last year, I wrote this entire thing. I described every candidate across every possible dimension of policy. I made that matrix. That matrix has to be automated. It is not possible to do manually. And certainly, if we want to help other people get on scale, right? Use this bot at scale, we will be going from Montgomery County to Prince George, or Baltimore, or Garrett County, where there's no newspaper, right? And when we go to all those places, how will we know enough about them that we can then help voters figure out their choices using a technological tool? I'm sure I left a lot of things out. I'm also a little bit under the weather, which is why I asked. But I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm going to walk around and hand you my cards. So if you have any questions later on, or you want to work with me, right? I'm inviting collaboration broad from everybody. We're going to do this. We're going to bring the podcast out to different markets. There's lots of things to do.
I was interested in, I've been studying human behavior for 30 years, and I have questions already.
Yes,
In terms of
yes,
policy would do this
yes.
evaluation, so.
Yes, questions are what make us.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Oh, should I? Anybody else wants? No?
Got mine already.
Oh, you got, yeah. I feel like a little bit like Oprah at this point.
You get it.
The business card Oprah.
I just wonder if you create like a live answer test, and how would you get people to, like, it might be hard for you to interview people, because they wouldn't come forward to want to be interviewed, or, and then also, if you're using things that are already out in, the community, like, it's here, so it's there, and the machine is evaluating. One comment is that it's not fair, because some people might be more in the news and more out there than others, right?
All true things.
Because that's why I think that it might almost be impossible, but like, I'd be interested to see if there is a way, but.
So they will not be a perfect way.
I just like the idea of pushing on a lie detector test or
I
something,
think-
or zap you if you lie.
Yeah,
Or
right.
something.
No, I think you're right. I think it's absolutely the case that, there are lots of things we can do. And none of them will be perfect. It'll be several
Yeah,
years
that's what I was thinking.
before we can even make this workable.
It'd be nice to set a standard of some kind, I agree, like for something that you do.
You know what would be really nice? I'm really low level objective. Just getting something done so that it does even 10% of what we want to do.
Yeah.
It's not going to be perfect. So the podcast is a good tool because what it does allow, or it allowed me to have really deep knowledge of candidates. Like really deep knowledge, so I could say, no, don't BS me, right? That was the lie detector test. can we build the same logic on a machine? Please, reach out,
Yeah.
let's talk. Yeah.
It seems like so much of this depends on the kind of information that you've got going into the system. So in the case of a politician like Peter Franchot, who's been in Maryland State for a while, there's a lot of material to work with, a lot of material you can plug in. But you mentioned the town council election for Rockville. Most of that, in fact, actually only one person is running for reelection, the others are all newbies. There's gonna be practically nothing to draw on in terms of policy statements about stuff. So it brings us back to the original quandary, which is the lack of local journalism. You still gotta have a starting point. Somebody's still gotta go out and interview these people. I don't see that being replaced.
Okay, I'm doing both those things at the same time. So I totally recognize your dilemma, I totally recognize the problem, and that is why I am doing both those things at the same time. Recognizing that neither effort, so interviewing people, individual, like person to person, which I have done, right, is a scaling problem, has a real scaling problem. You cannot grow. Right? I'm trying that too. So I'm trying to replicate the podcast itself in at least another 2 counties. Right? So I'm trying to do that. Maybe I'll succeed. Okay? That's why I'm like, anybody who wants to jump on this band, on this shirt, yeah.
I'm sorry, I just have one last thought, I just thought of something, because, people's behaviors change, like, I've been told, like, every 10 years you change, the way you're thinking patterns and everything can change. So I like the idea of maybe having all politicians that you interview, like, a test, like, they all, in real time, the same time, if you're gonna interview them all within 1 month or 2, you have them solve the one problem, and then at least it gives you one base, and then their mindsets in solving this problem, and then that's the material that goes into the machine.
Interesting. So
That's how I think would be fair, because it's in real time, and everybody's behaviors change over courses, and things can affect their choices over time.
that's correct. I mean, I think that it would be possible. The thing is, in the real world, politicians don't behave are not cooperative people.
Yeah, that's why I think it would be fun, but I'm just talking theoretically, that would be
Right?
nice.
They
That would be
don't,
my
they don't
example.
like to cooperate over stuff like this, right? I really want you to, if you can find some time, listen to the Rockville interviews, because they are fresh, they're new, perhaps you live in Rockville, and they're even useful, right? Which is, a big thing. But if you go back and listen to all the old interviews, so the other problem I'll tell you is, when I interview, the interview is in depth and only about one topic. The interview is not just like, if you go to most candidates, have you been to a candidate forum? You have 10 people and they get 2 minutes. I think you organize one like that, right? Right, so everybody gets 2 minutes and then 30 seconds of rebuttal or whatever, right? And so in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, you solve all the problems of NCDX. Right? I took a complete, I am the anti-candidate interview, in forum interview. Right? I say to them, you choose the topic, whatever it is that you want. I will just talk to you about that. Right? I'll also ask them why they chose the topic, but I do it. And in almost all the cases, it is extraordinarily revealing how much they know, where they stand. Based on that interview, even if it's not on transportation, I can tell you where they are going with transportation.
So actually, if I could step in here just a second. You're talking about governance
Yeah.
and artificial intelligence. The counterpart to the Dennis Jones book, Colossus, where computers take over because human beings don't know what's good for them. The final story, and Asimov's I wrote, is called The Inevitable Conflict. And it imagined a world in the future that was basically supervised by elected officials who use robots to manage things. One of the elected officials realizes the machines have started making mistakes, and these mistakes are hurting certain groups of people, who it turns out are the very groups of people that don't like being governed by machines. And he's going to challenge them and take them down, but he's convinced not to, because it turns out the machines realize they know what people actually need as opposed to what they claim they need. And this is part of the problems you run into, especially with lie detectors. Do you want politicians who don't lie? Why? They're human. We lie all the time.
Yeah, sometimes in politics, life is
Do
very-
you want consistency? Because if you want consistency, if someone says, for example, Jeanette Rankin, who was elected from the state of Wyoming, saying, I'm a pacifist, she happened to be caught up in World War I, the Declaration of War. She voted no. She was voted out of office. She went on a world tour. She came back, went to the people of Montana, said, or Wyoming, said, I'm still a pacifist. I still want to be a representative. They said, great. Sent her to Congress in 1940, where guess what? December 7, 1941. She had to vote again. To her credit, she voted no. I'm against war. And they voted her the hell out of office. Because they were like, we elected you as a pacifist, but not that kind of pacifist. I mean, this is part of the problems you run into. And I think AI raises these questions. When we're looking at how to use artificial intelligence, what we're really looking at is, what about our own shortcomings? What about our inability to do this? And I think that they've been dealing with these problems in the post-World War II period for a while. But I'm sorry, there were a lot of questions over here that I interrupted.
Well, this is more an observation than a question. I'm just thinking, well, first of all, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I just want to say, Klatu Barada Nikto.
And with that, we have stopped Gort from destroying the world. So thank you. Or stopped the Army and Army of Darkness.
And Colossus, that movie, I saw that movie when I was 10 years old, and it scared the daylights out of me. But that being said, what you're both saying here, I think, is connected in this way. You know, is democracy becoming obsolescent? Because democracy is rooted in these Enlightenment features or ideas about self-awareness and choosing your own destiny, and in every individual capacity for rational thinking. But as we move toward the era of social media and people living in their own truth bubbles, and now we're moving to the era of AI, and these machines are making decisions maybe better, faster than we can. Is there still a room for a democracy? And I'm not expecting you to answer that question, but is there still room for democracy in
What do you
this?
mean by democracy?
Well, this idea that people, like a liberal